The Man with the Yin-Yang Eyes. Season 3. Episode 21. In the process of fleeing from the snake's pursuit, Big D and I were cornered in an ancient arena in the forest. Here, we are surrounded by snakes, unable to escape or defeat the snakes in our current situation. The only way left was to use my magic to cut off the snake's control. That's why I drew a magic circle and lured the snakes in to carry out my plan. At this moment, a bright golden light appeared in front of my eyes. The snakes were also immediately affected. They all froze as if petrified. As a beginner, I'm not sure if this will work or not, because up until now, I've only cast magic on humans and never once applied it to animals. But as soon as they were exposed to the magical light I created, the snakes reacted. They fell one by one at almost the same time. This is a sign that my magic has worked. A few seconds later, one of the 4 snakes began to wiggle and raise its head, and both I and Big D were very excited to observe its expression. Looking into the snake's eyes, I noticed that it was no longer as white as before but returned to normal. The snake kept looking around. I'm sure if I could speak, it would say, "Why the hell am I here?" What is happening has confirmed that the snake is no longer under control, but now, Big D and I have another worry. I don't know what these snakes will do next after returning to normal. The possibility that they will continue to attack us is very high. If that happens, my and Big D's lives here will be considered as an end. But this time, the goddess of fortune smiled upon us. After looking around for a while, the snakes left one by one, slithering gently to the doors from which they had crawled. Breathe a sigh of relief. At this point, all worries really disappear. I immediately turned to Big D to get the map from my backpack. I want to know where to continue. I don't want to stay in this arena anymore. While being chased by the snakes, the 2 of us ran around in the forest, and at this point, we really didn't know where we were anymore. Looking at the map is not much better. Most still have to guess their location. After studying the map for a while, Big D and I agreed to go east, because that's the most likely direction we can see on the map. If we were outside, it wouldn't be hard for us to see which way is east, but now both are in the arena, the surrounding is obscured, so temporarily don't know which direction east is. Big D then pointed at the entrance and said that it was east. But just a few words, Big D suddenly fell silent, followed by his face turning gray as if he had just seen something terrible. I was staring at the map, suddenly seeing Big D silent, so I was surprised. After looking up at the direction Big D was pointing at, I immediately understood why he was so scared. At this time, on the stone steps of the arena, a series of silhouettes appeared. Looking at their appearance and weapons, it is not difficult to recognize that this is a member of the snake tribe. I don't know how many people are surrounding us in total. I can only see close to 10 people in the arena. I guess that after they failed to control the snakes to attack us, these people came out directly to finish the work that the snakes left behind. The people surrounding us were highly fierce. As soon as they appeared, they shouted extraordinary voices. At first, when I first heard it, I thought it was the sound of some animal. As soon as the screams stopped, a series of sharp spears rushed towards us. Big D and I are now standing in the middle of the empty arena, with absolutely nowhere to hide. This makes our situation even more dangerous. Other than jumping backward, we have no other way to avoid the spears. While jumping backward, barely dodging a few spears that lunged at him, before he could even stand, another spear rushed forward. This time its launcher made a precise calculation. The spear aimed straight at my head as the target. Fortunately, my reflexes were also good, so I caught the spear in time, just when it was less than an inch from my head. Big D's side wasn't so good. Not one but 5 or 6 spears were thrown at him. Knowing that he has no way to dodge, Big D only has to raise his hand to cover the weak spots on his body. The purpose is to reduce the damage to the lowest level. Of course, I can't just watch Big D gets injured, spear in hand. I immediately used it to fend off the spears rushing at Big D. If only I had acted a little slower, Big D would have become a reluctant hedgehog. I know full well that it's not an excellent way to dodge. Sooner or later, I will be defeated by these dangerous spears. I shouted to Big D to find a way out and stop the spears. Big D also immediately cooperated with me. While running to find the exit, Big D said to me, "Be careful, kid, I'll go upstairs. Follow me, don't let them turn me into a hedgehog." While dodging the spears, the two of us successfully ran up to the second floor of the arena. I don't understand why Big D brought me up here, but now there's no time to ask Big D. I only know how to cover the back and run after Big D. At this point, the distance between us and the fierce aborigines has narrowed very close. Found it no longer possible to launch spears at us. The guys present on the second floor immediately approached us to attack from close range. Big D knows well if we let these dangerous aborigines get close, the possibility of winning a duel with them was almost impossible. Big D immediately pulled out his self-defense pistol and started shooting at the first movers. Although it is possible to defeat these people immediately, Big D does not do that. He just fired warning shots to get these guys to back off. I understand entirely why Big D did that. Once the blood has been spilled, the only way is to take blood to pay the blood debt. After looking around, I understood why Big D chose to run up here because a rope ladder leads to the upper floor. Without hesitation, I immediately climbed ahead. Big D followed me. Knowing the power of the gun in Big D's hand, the locals did not dare to get too close, but they were also determined not to let us go. They still followed but tried to keep a safe distance. As soon as Big D climbed off the rope ladder, I used the spear in my hand to cut the rope ladder. The place we just climbed up was the third floor of the arena. At this time, Big D discovered a new problem. After cutting off the tails of the ferocious aboriginals, I began to look around. My feeling right now is the same as Big D's. Both of us feel that running up here was a mistake, but now there is no chance to save us anymore. It turned out that behind the wall of the arena was a steep, deep cliff. It can be seen that there is a dense forest next to this cliff. We have determined this direction on the map, but we still do not know how to cross this ravine over 10 meters wide. Looking down at the ravine, I asked Big D, "Is there any mistake here? Why does the map point to a dead end like this?" Looking down at the bottom of the cliff, Big D was similarly skeptical. Still, Big D insisted that the only direction was to cross this ravine according to the map. After taking his eyes off the cliff, Big D turned his gaze to the forest in front of him and said to me, "Damn it, why isn't this abyss on the map? It's terrible this time. Unless you know how to fly, there's the only way back down." While Big D and I were still not sure what to do, some of the Snake Clan climbed the wall we were standing on. This means that going back to the bottom is not possible. As time went on, the Aboriginal people drew closer to us. Looking at them, I understood that if I didn't find a way quickly, we have no choice but to fight to the death. At this moment, Big D suddenly shouted. He said that he had found a way to solve the problem. I immediately looked in the direction Big D was pointing and saw two wooden poles, like flagpoles, not far from us. Looking at the two rather tall wooden pillars, I immediately understood Big D's intentions. Not sure about this plan, but at this point, basically, the two of us don't have a choice. Every opportunity must be made the most of. Without saying another word to each other, Big D and I rushed towards the two pillars. Behind us, the locals were still in close pursuit. Turning to look at the Aboriginal people chasing me behind, I shouted to Big D, "Aren't you afraid of heights? Are you sure you can climb that pillar?" At this moment, a spear flew past my head. It lightly touched Big D's ear, startling him. Of course, Big D didn't need to answer. I guessed his answer too. Soon we were running to the foot of the two pillars. Big D immediately raised his eyes to look. Needless to say, I know that right now, Big D's head is having a decisive ideological struggle. One side is life's greatest fear, the other is life-threatening extreme danger. Although he didn't want to, Big D had no other choice right now.